Today, we're going to talk a little bit more about finishing up the Aaron's outline with the phylogeny, the tree of life. You are not responsible for the chapter on origin of life. To look at and do. In terms of the schedule, we probably should look ahead as to what's going on. Actually, it's saying origin of life today, but we did that Friday. But we're finishing up the phylogeny and the tree of life, and then we're moving on to C52. And Brooklyn, thank you for your outline, your very detailed outline also, which is the start of ecology. So this particular exam is going to be mostly evolution, but it also has 2 chapters of ecology in it. On Wednesday, we're going to finish up 52, and actually, I'm hoping we'll have 54, which is community ecology, which is more of the predator-prey relationships and basic terminology that you may be familiar with, but a lot more detail than you probably had before. And you will be getting that outline tonight, tomorrow. There'll be a quiz on Friday, which says it's over C24, which is the origin of species. The little bit we talked about with the origin of life by the packet, and also phylogeny and the tree of life, and a little bit of chapter 52. So that's the quiz on Friday. We're going to review for the exam, we're going to unify the information, and your exam is on Monday. So it's over the evolution, all the evolution, and the 2 chapters of ecology. So we'll talk more a little bit later about how the test will be constructed. There will definitely be some multiple choice, but it won't all be multiple choice necessarily. There may be some straight out answers like you see more on quizzes. There could be some true or false.
This test next Wednesday. Next Monday at a week.
Today, yes. Like this, the schedule says it is, and I'm already up to 30-some questions, and I've got like 3 chapters missing. So I would imagine there'll be somewhere around 60 questions, 50 to 60 questions, as you may guess. Again, they're objective primarily. Things like true and false. When I do true and false, I don't try to make them tricky per se. I don't want you to answer something false because you think it's grammatically correct, or if you need to answer my true and false based upon the content of what it says. Okay. I know some teachers like to be really tricky with true and false. That's not my intent. Okay, 2 work that he did. I'm just going to put the outline up here for a little bit. And you do have your PowerPoints that help explain what these things are. In the very beginning of this chapter, it talked about the legless lizards, and they're really not snakes. Do you remember, did that legless lizard situation in terms of evolution, did it occur like just once in evolution, or has it occurred for multiple different animals? I think Brooklyn, you're right, multiple different animals. I think there's a tough question on that one. It didn't just happen once. You're supposed to be on. Flashing boots. Why are you turning yourself off? The concepts are really important, and I'm making you a chapter outline with the concepts from all the chapters, which I think would be a good overview study guide. It's always good to study and almost pretend as though you're doing the teaching and try to explain some of this aloud. Hear yourself do that. These type of things. What's the difference between taxonomy and phylogeny? Who wants that? What's the difference between taxonomy and phylogeny?
The taxonomy is naming whatever it is, and then phylogeny is showing its relationship to like ancestors.
Right, okay, the ancestors in the evolutionary history. And also there's much more DNA analysis, molecular analysis that is now used with phylogeny. And so phylogeny is like showing the ancestry phases, and you have the tree of life situation, whereas Linnaeus, when he did his taxonomy, which we talked about up here, he really, at the time, and I think it was 1700 and something, he thought that organisms were fixed, that they didn't change. They had no idea that things were the way they are now, and they didn't think things would change. So Linnaeus really did think that things were fixed, but he was wrong. And with that, phylogeny is more complicated, obviously. But in terms of classification, what's the general name for any grouping? It's called a taxon. Okay, very good. So it could be a genus, it could be a kingdom, it could be a phylum, it could be a domain. How many domains are there? Three. Okay. Two of them are prokaryotic, and one, which is kingdom or domain, eukaryotic. Very good. So, and then if we look at linking classification and phylogeny, so the phylogenetic tree is a diagram. Taxonomy has changed a lot over the years. Remember, we've gone from a 2-kingdom system to a 5-kingdom system based upon new information. But this is talking about the actually phylogenetic trees, how to read it on figure 26.5. The ones that are linked together are sister taxa, groups of organisms sharing an immediate common ancestor. So they would be the closest relatives. I think there might be one illustration so far on the test that is not real hard to figure out because I didn't make it complicated. But trees show patterns of descent, but not phenotypic similarity necessarily. So they don't necessarily all have hair or all have a certain characteristic, but they're more evolutionary patterns of descent. So that would be a difference. it shouldn't be assumed that a taxon on a tree evolved from the one next to it. There's a figure that talks about that. Applying phylogenies. Yeah, that is corn. It's actually, DNA analysis has even been used on whale meat that has been sold, and they can tell where the whales came from by doing the DNA analysis. And some places are illegal to get whales from, and they've actually detected poachers getting whales from certain areas just based on DNA. So we've really become much more high-tech. So, concept 26.2, phylogenies are inferred from morphological and molecular data. So morphological is the way they look, their build, but also molecular data. Homology. I think I want to do this. When you have adaptive radiation, which, think of it this way, you start out with a common ancestor, and then like fingers, you have different species different kinds that go out from a common ancestor. That's adaptive radiation, divergent evolution. And if they're adaptive, they have homologous traits. Like the wing of a bird and the flipper of a whale, even though they're in different orders, and well, they're actually different classes. They have a lot of the same forearm. Remember, we talked about the forearm limbs being similar. And homologous traits are similar. Wings of a bird would be used for flying. The flippers of a whale would be used for swimming. So they're similar structures and origin, but they have different functions for those. Those are homologous traits, as opposed to convergent evolution, which is where you would have different kinds, and they are actually coming up with, not the same, coming up with some converging here. And convergent evolution produces analogous structures. It's homologous. And these are characters are different origins and structure, evolutionary from different groupings. You end up with some structures that have similar functions. Gills and lungs are both for respiration, but they are coming from whole different structure background. So analogous structures are more convergent evolution. And so it talks about this here. Homoplasties, analogous structures that arose independently from Greek to mold in the same way. So homoplasties are in reference to analogous structures that have arisen. Evaluating molecular, I'm not going to get into this. I'm not going to get into the evaluating molecular part. There's a figure in there, a couple that are talk about insertions and deletions of nucleotides. Just kind of know that insertions and deletions can contribute to all of these changes, but you don't need to get into the specifics of it. Shared characters are used to construct phylogenetic trees. So if I ask you on the test, what are used to construct phylogenetic trees?
So, like on the side it says homology is similar due to shared ancestry, and analogy is similar due to convergent evolution. What's like the difference between shared ancestry and convergent evolution?
Shared ancestry would be more the homologous situation where they come from one line and then they diverge out, but they keep a lot of homologous traits that are similar.
Okay.
Whereas convergent, we're talking about traits here. This doesn't mean that these two types of organisms go into one organism. We're talking about just traits here. They end up with similar traits just by convergent evolution and with that analogous structures.
Okay.
They're the opposite. If you just remember homologous as similar structures, then they have different functions. They may have different functions and structures too. And then analogous is the opposite. It has really similar functions, but they came from different ancestors. So shared characters are used to construct phylogenetic trees. We kind of, I think, looked at one on the PowerPoint where we did the ones where they have hair, or they have claws, or if they have whatever. Cladistics is a system where common ancestry is the primary criterion used to classify organisms, and clades are a group of species including a common ancestral species and all of its descendants. So clad is the term used in phylogenetic trees. They're monophyletic. This is the simplest. Mono means one, of course. Same as taxon and clade, consisting of all ancestral species and all of its descendants. Paraphyletic includes ancestral species and some, but not all of its descendants. And poly, which means many. Polyphyletic includes distantly related species, but not their common ancestry. So those are three different types of clades. Okay, this is traits of and that's what's looked at, like the hair, the jaws, whatever the different traits are. Outgroups are are species or a group of species from an evolutionary lineage that diverged before the lineage being studied. So if the lineage being studied is the group is not even really looked at. It's out there somewhere. Don't make these terms worse than they are. Just kind of take them on parsimony, which means keep it simple. Maximum parsimony and maximum likelihood. Parsimony, investigate the simplest explanation that is supported by facts first. And that's also called, and if you have physics and you can have other fields of science, what else do they call it? Occam's razor, right. And maximum parsimony. Investigate the simplest explanation that is supported by facts first, instead of getting all complicated with drawing these evolutionary trees. I'm not going to ask you to draw an evolutionary tree, but you should be able to translate some information. Are they true theories, or are they hypotheses? Which is more evidence-based, a theory or a hypothesis?
The theory.
A theory. Remember, a theory is as close to this is the way it is as we get in science, at least based upon information that we have today. A hypothesis. In terms of phylogenetic trees, they are hypotheses because we don't know for sure. We're still testing. We're still gathering evidence with a lot of these trees. Since DNA analysis has allowed us to do more of it. Don't forget to read all the concepts. The concepts say a lot, and if you remember the concepts and understand them, some of this terminology and other stuff, and I mean, like if you have a multiple choice question, if you understand the concept, it's probably going to be easier to come up with the right answer. An organism's evolutionary history is documented in its genome. What in the world is a genome? What is a genome? Corinne?
The genome is the collection of all the DNA in an entire sequence of an organism.
Beautiful. I couldn't have said it better. Yes. So it's all that DNA, all those nucleotide bases, the G's, the A's, the C's, the T's, all of those in sequence that determine the parts of the genes. And I hope it's not hard. I'm not sure. You seem to have a little question as to where. That's our own internal problem as to semester with the last topic, but, and I kind of brought this up before, but do you know what introns and exons are? Okay, good. Okay, so. Protein synthesis, you studied that, right? How to do protein synthesis. Exons, and I know, to me even, it always sounds like it should be the opposite. But introns are non-coding. We used to think that all of our nucleotide bases of our genome were all coding. They all coded for protein. In triplet codes, remember? Triplet code, like AGC, would stand for a particular amino acid that's going to be brought up. and then the amino acids are hooked up together by peptide bonds to make a polypeptide. But introns are non-coding intervening sequences of DNA which space things out. It's more complicated than that. They have a promoter and other things too, but there's a lot of non-coding DNA and eukaryotic genomes, which prokaryotes don't because they're, shall we say, energy efficient. They don't have a lot of extra, whereas eukaryotes do. And I think you also probably learned that, so an organism's evolution in history is documented in its genome, and particularly a lot in its introns, in its non-coding. Genes evolve at different rates, allowing lineages to be traced on molecular change on various genes depending upon their age and rate of change. So again, it's not something we could do in our laboratory, but it's something that molecular biologists could do to analyze the DNA and or analyze the proteins that are produced by certain DNA sequences. All right, a lot of times there are gene duplications and families. Orthologists of genes, homology as a result of speciation event and thus occurs between genes found in different species from a common ancestor. Whereas paralogous genes are associated with gene duplication, where the DNA gets duplicated like a copy machine, it gets added to it. And then there's a figure that actually explains that. In the genome evolution, lineages that diverged long ago often share many orthologies of genes. More genes doesn't equal more complexity. Complexity comes from the versatility of the gene. Complex organisms have genes that make multiple proteins or multiple functions. When there's a need, it gets filled. So, and in speaking about introns and so forth and non-coding, molecular clocks help track evolutionary time. Molecular clocks an approach for measuring the absolute time of evolutionary change based on observation that some genes evolve at constant rates. Are we talking about a day or two? No, we're talking about thousands, if not millions of years. But there are some genes that can serve as molecular clocks that have been clocked and can be predicted to change in a certain number of years. Not that a person's going to be able to see this change, but can be predicted. So there are differences in clock speed, but there are problems with the two. Lack of consistency of DNA changes due to natural selection. So if you have natural selection, then obviously that's going to be affecting what's available. The gene pool that's going to be available, like if the environment selects against a certain trait, then it won't be as predictable. And they've applied a molecular clock to the dating of the origin of HIV. They've actually thought that HIV, of course, is a virus. It's a retrovirus, which means it's an RNA virus, and it contains reverse transcriptase, an enzyme to be able to make DNA from RNA. And they've actually decided that even though we didn't really know much about HIV until the 80s or so, which causes AIDS, they're saying that it actually appeared, they think, in the 1930s, but was never really identified because we didn't have the technology and understanding to be able to identify. Our understanding of the tree of life continues to change based on new data. So we're definitely not, okay, I want to throw out two words, static and dynamic. You're going to see, particularly as we go to the ecology section, that dynamic is going to be used quite a bit. And dynamic means ever-changing. It's flowing. It's not going to stay the same, whereas static is more stable, stay the same. So this is going to continue to change. This will not be the last of the changes as we get new technology and so forth. We also think that horizontal gene transfer suggests eukarya and archaea organisms are more closely related to each other than bacteria. However, some data suggests otherwise. Remember, the three domains are bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. And some of the characteristics that archaea have suggest that, in fact, I would probably lean more that direction based upon what is most often talked about. Probably that archaea are more closely related to eukaryotes than we are to bacteria, but they're, you're going to have some data both ways. Horizontal gene transfer is where genes are transferred from one organism to another via infection, exchange of plasmids, transposable elements, and the fusion of organisms like mitochondria and chloroplasts into a cell. Now, transposable elements are like Barbara McClintock had won a Nobel Prize, I don't know, back in the 70s, I think it was, for her work with maize, corn. And she found transposable elements called jumping genes. That there are some DNA sequences that can actually jump from one location to another within the genome. And that can have an effect. So those are transposable elements. The plasmids are those extra chromosomal pieces in bacteria that convey resistance often. And infection, like viral infection and so forth. There's a lot of terminology, but I wish I could ask you about 200 questions. I could rightfully test you over the whole everything. There will be detail on the test, but I'm also a can you see the forest for the trees person too. I go for big concepts as well as understanding of big concepts. Even though the terminology is important too. I'm going to provide you with some tools that will help narrow it down a little bit. They're just not ready yet. Everybody finding the outlines okay when I add them? The people send them to me? They're down here. So, what is the branch of biology that studies the interrelationship between risk and numbers? Yes. What is the study of changes over time? Evolution. So don't get your E's mixed up. All right. Evolution, changing over time. This is an introduction to ecology and the biosphere. Do you remember again that hierarchy? And that hierarchy is going to keep coming back to us. Whereas the biosphere is everywhere on the earth, on, in, around, above the earth in which life can exist is called the biosphere. So that's the whole earth. And above. Whereas global is sort of just the earth itself not necessarily up or way below. Anyway, this is an introduction, so let's see where we can go here. I trust it. We better, huh? So there was a discovery of 2 frog species in New Guinea that raised many ecological questions. This sounds evolutionary too, doesn't it? Speciation. What environmental factors limit their geographical distribution? And what factors, food and pathogens, affect population size? So what environmental factors limit their geographic, remember biogeography?
Well, New Guinea's an island country, so
Okay, that's right. And what factors, what's their food? Also, what predators do they have? Predation, food, predation, and also pathogens, anything that causes disease, make them sick and die, and affect their population size. So these are 2 big questions. That's just sort of an intro. So here's one of them. It's really cute. I love amphibians. Amphibians and also turtles, reptiles. Look how small this is.
It's a little guy.
That's a dime. Probably more like a tree frog, right? So there you go with what ecology is. These interactions determine the distribution of organisms and their abundance. Wow, does this look familiar? Sort of. The organism, a population of them, a community where the other organisms also interact. The ecosystem, which is the actual, including the interrelationships of the specific environment, whether it's a pond, it's a lake, it's a river, it's a ocean, it's a deciduous, it's a coniferous forest, pine cones, it's a desert. Those are biomes, how their system. And landscape ecology and global ecology. So this is landscape taking into more ecosystems together, because you've got water and land. So terrestrial and aquatic or marine. Usually I refer to freshwater, lakes, streams, ponds as aquatic, and the ocean, saltwater as marine. But they're both water environments. Now, if you're going to be an ecologist, you could be an organismal ecologist, and this is what you study. And the physiology, which is how things function inside of them, their evolutionary history, and their behavioral ecology. Population, we know what population is. By the way, similar organisms, just like bees, their colors can be influenced by their diet. True interaction between the environment and the living things, which are the biotic. We've already identified, have we not, biotic from abiotic factors. Biotic factors are all the living things, and abiotic are the non-living things such as soil, such as the weather conditions, such as rainfall, or the abiotic factors, minerals. Community ecology. The next chapter is on community ecology. Examines the effect of interspecific interactions on community structure and organization. It's the zebra and all these different populations interacting in the same area as a community. Ecosystem, the community of organisms in an area and the physical factors with which they interact. Emphasizes energy flow, food chain, food web. Chemical cycling, the recycling of nutrients, nitrogen cycling, carbon cycle, lots of different mineral recycling. Landscape or seascape is a mosaic of connected ecosystems. The biosphere is the global ecosystem, the sum of the planet's ecosystems and landscapes. Examines the influence of energy and materials on organisms across the biosphere. Thus, you think we can get into some conservation biology, some global warming and other types of things that can affect the whole globe. Okay, concept one. Earth's climate varies by latitude and season and is changing rapidly. All right, weather and climate are often used interchangeably, whereas they influence each other but are not necessarily, they're not the same. Climate would be the big pattern of precipitation and temperatures and so forth, whereas weather is an immediate, it's what you get on a day-by-day situation. But the four major physical components of climate, okay, I would know these: temperature, precipitation, which would be amount of moisture, whether it's in rain or snow. How many inches of snow equals 1 inch of rainfall?
12.
You're close, unless I'm wrong. I used to know it as 10. 10, I think, somewhere between 10 and 12. It takes 10 to 12 inches of snow. So if you have 4 inches of rain in 2 days, just think how many inches of snow that could be.
About 4 feet.
Yeah, right. So it depends upon where you are, latitude, longitude, equator, subtropical, temperate areas, all of these are going to come into play. Temperature, precipitation, sunlight, and wind. 4 components of just look at that if you read it. You know, the closer you get to the equator, the hotter it is, right? So you've got your tropical areas, you've got your subtropical, and we're more in a temperate area, which is sort of in between, but we're getting warmer. I mean, data is supporting the fact that we're getting warmer. Okay. We hypothesize why we're getting warmer. I'm not saying that we can't necessarily prove, but prove is not one of those words that scientists tend to use anyway. But there's a lot of evidence to support the fact of global warming. Latitudinal variation in sunlight intensity. The angle at which the sunlight hits the Earth affects its intensity, the amount of heat and light per unit of surface area. And that can affect plant populations. It can affect animal populations. The intensity, and with holes in the ozone, we get more intensity even here in the temperate climates, which is affecting some populations. Strongest in the tropics, of course, where sunlight strikes the earth almost directly instead of at an angle. And of course, the seasons of the year. So if we're having winter now, what is South America having? Summer, or the southern parts, yes. So this is kind of gives you an idea. Global air circulation and precipitation patterns. The water cycle. You have water evaporating, and then it can condense. So precipitation patterns. Global air circulation. So what happens in England, can that eventually affect the United States? Yes, and it's because of which natural law that goes from the greatest concentration to the lesser concentration? Diffusion. Diffusion. I know the air, the atmosphere is very large. So you have the diffusion. Yes.
Apparently, it made the news, there was some climate-related thing that actually blew sand from the Sahara Desert in Africa all the way to the United States.
Right.
It was something to do with the whole circulation thing.
I think I may have seen that subject line, but I didn't
Yeah.
very good.
Like a couple years ago, the volcano, I think in Iceland or Greenland, and all the air traffic was affected, like from New York to.
So all the debris and the sense to, sure. At least I don't want. Physical geography. And physical geography studies a lot about weather and all of this kind of stuff. I had a physical geography. I had to study my butt off. It was difficult, I thought, for me. But it's very, it affects us. It's all part of ecology. Climate varies seasonally and is modified by factors including large bodies of water and mountain ranges. So large bodies of water and mountain ranges, what do they have to do with anything? Brooklyn, you want to tell us?
Water can affect precipitation,
Okay.
mountain ranges. Yeah, I guess it could be colder up there.
Okay, you do have your temperature lines, there's no doubt. Let's see, where are we?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say, like mountains separate, like, I guess, like climate areas, like you can have tropical and then on the other side of the mountains you can have snow or.
Yeah, they can be quite a barrier of change for the weather patterns. I'm just trying to find it on, I just haven't, it hasn't popped up at me yet, but I'm sure it's on here. Okay, seasonal variations will vary. What's the longest day of the year?
Solstice.
And when is that?
June 21st.
June 21st, very good. And I always get myself depressed because, you know, we're building up to these longer days, and then on June 21st, it's like, oh my gosh, our days are gonna get shorter now. And the shortest day of the year,
The winter solstice.
December 21st, right? So we've survived that.
Isn't that changing though? Like the solstice, like we've been calling it for a while, but technically doesn't it change? The days are getting longer, like so how long is it gonna take for this like equinox to change officially?
I don't know. That's a good question. As things do change, I'm not sure. We'll continue to study. Please look at the PowerPoint. Study the outline of Urban's given us. And we'll continue